OK, well, now it's time to speak to former Government Minister Ann Widdecombe for a UK political perspective. Anne, thank you so much for joining us a little later than usual on a Sunday night. You'll understand why, of course, if you're just joining us. Joe Biden has withdrawn from the race for the White House in November. Is this a political problem for Donald Trump?
I don't think it's a problem for Donald Trump in quite the same way that I think it does actually give the Democrats a problem. This is a very, very late withdrawal. And if he had done it this time last year, it could have all been handled very smoothly. It's a very late withdrawal. And because he has been so bad in recent weeks, I mean, so very bad that it's actually arrived at this stage, there is the enormous question of whether or not he should carry on until the presidency changes hands. So I think the Democrats have got the larger share of the problem. They've also got to find at speed a new candidate for the next presidential term and maybe also a new vice president candidate. So they've got a problem. I mean, one of the reasons why Biden has been able to cling on so successfully is that there hasn't been an obvious successor, somebody who outstripped everybody else and whom people said, yes, this is the man. There hasn't been that man. And indeed, there wasn't on the Republican side either. It's been Trump almost by default. So there is a big problem there. And I think there's a big problem for American politics as well. Now, how have they ended up with the choice that they ended up with between Trump and Biden? I think they've got to look at their systems, at the huge dependence on money and all the rest of it.
Most definitely. And as you know, we live in an increasingly dangerous world, and they'll be loving this chaos in Moscow and Beijing. Yes.
I mean, almost the only people who will be rejoicing in this are indeed, Putin and Xi Jinping. And they will be. It doesn't do the enemies of the West any harm, and it doesn't diminish their own confidence when they look at the West and see it in this sort of state. And it's been in this sort of state for quite a long time. It's been quite obvious that the leader of the Western world was senile for quite a long time. And I think it probably did have some sort of impact or play some sort of part when Putin did decide to invade Ukraine.
And notwithstanding Joe Biden's cognitive health, what's your appraisal of his 4 years in the White House?
Well, of course, it's very difficult not to see it as dominated by, as you put it, his cognitive health. I don't think he has done as much as he should have done for relations with Britain. I think, in fact, he's been quite anti-Britain. We remember how he behaved when he visited Ireland, which would have been scandalous, actually, had he not already by then been generally recognised to be failing mentally. It would have been scandalous. And he's always been anti-British, anti-Brexit, got some rather funny historical view of the Irish problem. So I wouldn't actually rate it that highly. But on the other hand, if he can now go in a dignified way, and that's going to be difficult if he hangs on. If he can go in a dignified way now, well, fair enough, let's move on to a new world.
Indeed, and he bangs on about being Irish. I've looked at his family tree. He's about as Irish as a Toyota Prius, but we'll leave that to one side. What about the Democrats now? There are parallels, aren't there, between what's happening in the United States and the Democratic Party, who need a new leader, and the Conservatives here in the UK. What do you think is the best course of action for the Democrats? They need a good candidate, but the issue is if they have a prolonged beauty contest, they could tear themselves apart.
I don't actually think that the Democrats have got so many beautiful candidates that they're going to have a prolonged beauty contest, quite honestly. I think it will probably end up as a virtual shoe-in for somebody. The Conservatives, on the other hand, I think are doing the wise thing by waiting a bit and not rushing into it, as I had thought that they would immediately after the election. They seem content to wait for a short while. their beauty contest might be a bit more convincing because there are a few candidates who, in their terms, not Reform's terms, but Conservative terms, might be quite reasonable.
And you are a spokesperson for Reform UK. Are you at odds with the leader, Nigel Farage, and his enthusiasm for Donald Trump?
I don't think I'm at odds with him. I mean, my own enthusiasm is a little bit more muted. But on the other hand, you know, Trump is pro-British, he's pro-Brexit. From my perspective, he's pro-life. So, you know, there is a lot to be said for Trump, and he's certainly got guts, and he's demonstrated that guts in recent days. And so, you know, I don't think we're at odds, but maybe our enthusiasm is not exactly equal.
It wouldn't be Sunday night without Ann Widdecombe, and Ann, will catch you in a week's time. My thanks there to former Government Minister Ann Widdecombe. Look how polite she is. I mean, honestly, they don't make them like that anymore. We were going to get Ann on to talk about Strictly, but there's a Strictly crisis happening in the White House.